In the neon-lit arcades of the 1970s, Japan's journey as a gaming powerhouse quietly began. Early arcade hits like Taito's Periscope and Atari-inspired games ignited public interest. But it was Space Invaders, created by Tomohiro Nishikado, that triggered a true revolution. Space Invaders was so popular that, according to Nishikado, when Taito launched the game in 1978, it became so popular that it sucked up so many 100 yen coins that Japan endured a coin shortage. The Japanese mint had to triple production of the coin. It earned arcades a new urgency. The once pinball-dominated halls turned to video games. Taito's success, followed by Namco's Pac-Man and Sega's shooters, cemented Japan's early leadership in coin-operated games. A key philosophy guided Japan's ascent. As Nintendo president, Hiroshi Yamauchi reflected in 1989, Nintendo's mission was simple. We create things that people think are fun to play, then let success follow. He famously urged his teams,
他社の類似品は出すな。
don't copy other companies' products. This insistence on originality helped launch genre-defining franchises. In the early 1980s, the arcade boom coincided with a microcomputer revolution in Japan, from quirky games to home consoles, and all driven by sheer consumer enthusiasm. Japan's rise to the top of the global video game industry began in the 1980s with an arcade explosion and smash-hit consoles. While North America was reeling from the 1983 video game crash, Japan's Nintendo took a strict quality over quantity approach. Nintendo famously limited each third-party developer to just 5 titles per year, ensuring only the best games reached shelves. In 1983, Nintendo released the family computer, the Famicom, later relaunching it as the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, abroad. This disciplined strategy paid off. As US gamers became disillusioned, Japanese players piled into game centers, arcades, and home consoles. In fact, by the mid-1980s, the average Japanese gamer was spending roughly 4,700 yen, $47 per year on games, about 10 times the US per capita spend. Helped by a thriving arcade culture, Japan had 4 times as many game centers per person as the US. This booming domestic demand fueled the industry's growth. The video game crash of 1983 in America shifted the balance of power. In Japan, it was known as the Atari shock, but Japanese companies had already begun their next chapter. In 1983, Nintendo's Famicom and Sega's SG-1000 debuted within weeks. Backed by Japan's booming economy, both consoles dominated local sales and faced little foreign competition. The Famicom became a smash hit. By 1986, it was in 6.5 million households, nearly 20% of Japan's population. Nintendo exported it worldwide as the NES 2 years later, complete with toy-like marketing like introducing ROB and calling it an entertainment system to win over wary Western retailers. Throughout the 1980s, Nintendo and Sega battled for home dominance, while a host of Japanese developers rose: Capcom, Konami, and Hudson Soft. Nintendo's own designers like Shigeru Miyamoto created enduring classics: Donkey Kong, Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda. These titles not only cemented Nintendo's global lead, but fueled the entire console boom. In Yamauchi's words, blockbuster games didn't need market surveys. People can tell if something is fun. We sold Super Mario Bros. 3.7 million copies because 90 out of 100 people thought it was fun. Game design became an art form. Miyamoto would later be honored as Japan's only person of cultural merit in gaming. Meanwhile, Sega pursued innovation, but also promoted arcades, with hits like Afterburner. By the late 1980s, Japanese machines owned arcades worldwide and held a near monopoly on home consoles. In 1991, Capcom's Street Fighter II further exploded the arcade scene and launched the fighting genre globally. Sega's Genesis Mega Drive challenged Nintendo overseas, but Nintendo's new Super Famicom, or the SNES, matched it. This era saw the birth of iconic series and genres. Square's Final Fantasy and Enix's Dragon Quest defined the JRPG style, Konami's Gradius and Tecmo's action games, Namco's Pac-Man led to endless spin-offs. Sony's entry was still on the horizon. From day one, Japanese games were built on a tight hardware-software ecosystem. Major Japanese console makers worked hand in hand with local electronics firms, creating machines packed with cutting-edge technology. For example, Nintendo famously kept its console designs in-house, outsourcing only manufacturing and retaining R&D. So each new system debuted with the latest chips and features. This gave Japanese studios an edge. They could develop games hand in glove with the hardware designers. Square Enix legend Hironobu Sakaguchi even noted that Japanese developers could ask Nintendo or Sony directly in Japanese when building games, leading to higher quality titles that simply felt more fun. In other words, Japan's hardware cluster and its language-cultural unity let creators iterate and innovate faster. At the same time, Japan's publishers and studios formed a compact, highly organized cluster. Nintendo's seal of quality and exclusivity deals meant gamers could trust their library, while Sega and later Sony offered alternatives with different creative freedoms. Big Japanese companies often spawned tight-knit internal studios. For example, Nintendo's in-house teams led by visionaries like Shigeru Miyamoto, or Sony's PlayStation studios had direct support from the console maker. These studio-publisher relationships were more vertically integrated than in the West. Japanese developers typically signed on as employees or official licensees of a console giant, rather than independent indies shopping around. This kept costs and pirates down and ensured steady funding. As one analyst notes, during the NES era, Nintendo monopolized the market by having third parties sign an exclusivity agreement and capping their yearly output at 5 games, a ruthlessly effective barrier to low-quality oversaturation, precisely what had sank Atari in 1983. With 90% of the market under Nintendo's control, even unhappy developers had little choice but to toe the line. This tight ecosystem also meant fewer but much larger companies. By the 2000s, Japan's game sector had consolidated into a few giants, the Big Five: Nintendo, Bandai Namco, Sega Sammy, Square Enix, Konami. Together employ some 40,000 people. This scale allowed massive development budgets and global outreach. It also raised barriers to entry. Cutting-edge games require expensive technology, and with venture capital scarce in Japan, small startups could barely compete. In fact, one industry review points out that in decades, the only recent new entrant in this industry has been outside of Japan, Microsoft, underscoring how the established Japanese ecosystem dominated console gaming for years. In short, Japan's dev ecosystem was built around its consoles and creative studios, creating a self-reinforcing loop of quality, tech, and scale. Unlike Silicon Valley's formal tech schools, Japan's gaming talent pipeline was shaped by passion and art. In the 1980s and 90s, there were almost no specialized university programs in game design. Enthusiasts often learned on the job, mentored by industry veterans or inspired by manga and arcade games. A unique advantage for Japan was its creative industries. Many programmers, artists, and designers came from the thriving manga and anime fields. Compositing and 2D art schools already existed for animation, so graduates could easily transition to game studios. Indeed, by the late 1990s, a study found around 300 vocational schools offering video game-related training. Art and design colleges piggybacked on their anime curricula to add game-specialized courses, while technical colleges in Tokyo churned out programmers. Industry also helped train talent. Starting in 1998, Japan launched CDEC, Computer Entertainment Developers Conference, and other events supported by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, MITI. These gatherings, plus contests like the Tokyo Game Show's Amateur Corners, gave aspiring developers exposure to pros. By the 2000s, many universities had built game development programs to feed the industry. As one researcher notes, already 2 decades ago, Japan had 300 vocational schools offering training for video game-related occupations. And this pipeline has steadily advanced, even spawning Japan's first esports high school in 2022. In practice, though, many top studios continued hiring fresh graduates en masse, the national Shinsatsu system, and training them internally. The result was a steady stream of passionate young designers who had grown up on games themselves. Games in Japan are not a fringe hobby. They have long been woven into the culture. From classic pastimes like Go and Pachinko to modern arcades and handhelds, the Japanese have broadly embraced play across generations. In the 80s and 90s, game centers were ubiquitous social hubs for teens and adults alike, not just children. Parents often accepted gaming as part of youth culture, and even adult otaku openly celebrated their passions. This social acceptance meant Japan's industry could innovate freely. For example, JRPG and platforming genres flourished because players readily engaged with their unique storytelling and art styles, a stark contrast to Western audiences at the time. Top Japanese game creatives often cite their cultural roots as a strength. Square Enix's ex-president Yosuke Matsuda once advised developers to not imitate Western studios, pointing out that Japanese visual and audio style is what makes their games special. Hironobu Sakaguchi echoed this, saying he didn't feel the need to look west for inspiration. Instead, cherishing Japanese cultural background is what attracts people to games like Final Fantasy. In practice, this meant rich original worlds drawn from Japanese mythology, art, and narrative traditions that Western competitors lacked. Fans worldwide eventually recognized this uniqueness. Landmarks like The Legend of Zelda and Persona series are prized for their unique storytelling and character-driven design. This cultural embrace also shows in how seriously Japanese players take games. Competition is intense, but so is enthusiasm. Even outside arcade halls, game-related media, manga adaptations, merchandise, anime crossovers spread game culture everywhere. Japan's own game journalists and critiques took games seriously long before many Western countries did. All these factors combined to create an audience that was both large and deeply engaged. In short, gaming was a culturally celebrated creative industry and a cozy part of everyday life in Japan, giving Japanese developers a built-in supportive fan base and feedback loop from which to grow. Japan's economic boom in the 1980s provided fertile ground. With rising incomes and a tech-savvy society, families happily invested in electronics and entertainment. Japanese consumers had money to spend. By 2007, annual per capita video game spending in Japan was around $47, compared to just $5 in the US. In that era, almost every household owned a game console or PC. The Japanese government and industry bodies also recognize games as a strategic growth area, often under the banner of Cool Japan, Soft Power. The Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, MITI, eventually embraced the medium. For instance, in 2006, it unveiled a 5-year plan to promote domestic games, including a big international game awards ceremony to showcase Japanese creativity. Major trade organizations like CESA, Computer Entertainment Suppliers Association, routinely work with MITI to support the Tokyo Game Show and give Minister of Economy awards to top developers. Moreover, Japan's world-leading electronics firms, Sony, Nintendo, Fujitsu, etc., were partially products of government industrial policy. This meant video games benefited from Japanese R&D. Sony leveraged its expertise in CD technology to give PlayStation an early edge in 3D gaming. Japanese economic planners long saw the video game market as a valuable domestic industry and later export, supporting it with grants and encouraging cross-industry ties. While the West viewed games with skepticism at times, in Japan, politicians could cite Japan-made blockbusters as cultural achievements. All these factors, strong consumer demand, electronics giants, and eventual government backing, created an economic environment where Japanese games could thrive. Entering Japan's game industry has traditionally meant fitting into its unique workplace culture. Large studios often recruit cohorts of new graduates through campus drives rather than luring experienced freelancers, a contrast with Western hiring. Once hired, young developers learn on the job under the senpai-kohai, mentor-apprentice system. Outsiders note a strong hierarchy and formality in Japanese companies, but also high dedication. Many Japanese developers are gamers at heart, sharing their own childhood passion. As one foreign studio head observed about his Japanese colleagues, that dedication and that passion they have, here it seems to me it's so consistent. Everyone I talk to is going to have a story of their own, a focus of their own. In practice, this often means lifetime employment. A new hire might stay at one game company for decades, slowly moving up from junior roles to lead designer. The recruitment process reflects this ethos. Unlike Western studios, Japanese companies rarely give technical exams. Instead, a polished resume and portfolio, or even just game credits, often suffice. Candidates are usually informed promptly if they're not hired. Ghosting is rare. This polite style, while frustrating to some, fits the culture of respect. For local graduates, the system can be a secure entry path. You apply through job fairs and get placed with on-the-job training in project management and teamwork, skills that universities historically didn't teach, but many companies now train in-house. In short, Japan's hiring culture emphasizes training and loyalty, channeling fresh talent quickly into the industry's pipelines. By contrast to the West's indie-friendly climate, Japan's game industry has been relatively closed and capital-intensive. As mentioned, console makers strictly controlled who could develop on their machines. Nintendo's seal of quality, Sony's Japanese-only support lines, etc., effectively vetting entrants. This kept foreign or rogue developers at bay. Also, as games grew more complex in the 2000s, 3D graphics, motion capture, development costs ballooned. Analysts note that Japan had high barriers to entry by this point. Without venture capital or startup culture, it was nearly impossible to launch a new publisher or indie console. Indeed, one report quipped that the only new console for years was Microsoft's Xbox, an American product. Meanwhile, the established Japanese giants expanded through mergers, for example, Square plus Enix and Bandai plus Namco, and remained deeply entrenched. The result, a stable industry where a handful of large teams produce most games, and small newcomers must either partner or stay niche. On the other hand, this meant consistent quality. Japanese developers often build sequels or use proven engines. As one ex-Nintendo dev described, the Wii U's Yoshi's Woolly World was built on tech from earlier games. It may limit experimentation, but it ensured that Japanese titles rarely flopped on technical grounds. Combined with rigorous hardware certification, these industry barriers, both technological and organizational, actually protected consumers from poor games, an unintended advantage over the West's wild early market. Over 4 decades, Japan's unique blend of factors produced a global gaming powerhouse. A massive home audience and arcade culture created hungry early adopters. World-class electronics and in-house console development gave local studios a hardware edge. A creative tradition, manga, anime, folklore, fueled distinctive game design that resonated worldwide. Long-term business and hiring practices forged tightly integrated teams with deep expertise. And a culture that embraces playlit games flourish as art, not just products. Experts point to these synergies as reasons for Japan's outperformance. Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto and Sony's Ken Kutaragi still inspire admiration globally for their homegrown innovations. As Sakaguchi put it, Japan's ability to ask Nintendo or Sony directly in development allowed its games to be higher quality and more fun. Japan's rise wasn't due to any single advantage. It was the whole ecosystem. And even as Western developers have caught up in some respects, the legacy of Japan's approach endures in modern gaming. From the enduring popularity of RPGs and platformers to the continued success of Nintendo's Switch and Sony's PlayStation. In short, Japan's success story in games is a testament to how culture, industry, education, and policy can combine to create entertainment with global impact.